Good morning, and also good afternoon and good evening to some of our virtual attendees. It's so good to be with you right now. It's been incredible to just spend the weekend together for those of us in person, and I have to say I really don't want it to end, but I also am really looking forward to a beverage together this evening because the nerves are definitely real. I drank a lot of coffee this morning against my better judgment, but also I have to say that my heartbeat sounds a little bit like this right now, if you can hear it, maybe, or not. You can just hear my heart beating probably through the mic. Because this is the first time I'm speaking at a conference in over 3 years. Also the first time, being at a conference almost in quite a while. I think that's true for a lot of us. But I think the heartbeat, whether you can hear it here or just in your own body, is also the sound of your organization. Because I really believe that your organization, just like you, has a heartbeat. And that's what we're going to tap into together today and learn to start to listen to it. So I'm Jennifer Barckley, and as Marta said, I lead marketing and communications for the Humane League, a global nonprofit ending the abuse of animals raised for food. And today we're going to be specifically talking about rebranding to build power for the animals. So why are we talking about that? Because, as I said, rebranding is so critical to actually tapping into the core of who you are and guiding all of your communications. Now, I've been a part of many rebrands prior to the Humane League, but I'll mostly be talking through the lens of the experience of the Humane League. And that's been informed by branding a global agency, by building my own vegan cookie company and a brand for that, and also rebranding The Body Shop, which is the original global activist brand. But now I'd like to talk about you. So how many of you, by a show of hands, identify as leaders? I like it. Pretty bold. All right. Not as many as I would have thought or liked. So here's a secret. If you're here in the room right now, whether you identify as a leader or not, you actually are a leader. You are here creating change in our movement. So some of you may have seen in leadership guides this mantra of knowing yourself, knowing thyself. And that applies as much to yourself as an individual as it does to our entire organizations. Which is why I like to think, as I said, as your brand, as your organization's heartbeat. It encapsulates the very core of why you exist and who you are as an organization. And it very much impacts your strategy, your advocacy tactics, and how you literally show up and make an impact every day. I also like to think of it as your heartbeat because brands are simply a manifestation of what it is to be humans. And whether we like to think it or not, humans are really guided by our feelings. We are deeply emotional beings. In fact, we're so guided by our emotions that neurologists have found that when we think or make decisions, we do that with about 80% emotions and 20% rationality. So that's a rational way of saying that emotions really guide our decisions. Decisions like whether someone cares about animals or not. Decisions about whether someone takes action on your campaign or whether someone donates to you or not. As the neurologist Donald Kalnay said, the essential difference between emotion and reason is that emotion actually leads to action, while reason leads to conclusion. So of course we want conclusion sometimes, we want reason, but more emotion, more action. I think that's what we're all looking for in the work that we're doing for animals. So I'm going to play a song. Who's familiar with that song? Does anyone know what you just heard? Yeah, go ahead. Fabulous. And what do you feel when you hear the Polish national anthem? Surprise, yeah. Okay, yeah. Does it connect you to your country at all, or give you any relationship? Or Yeah, yeah. I think that's a key part of branding is it builds connection with others, with your fellow nationals, as you said. So this song is part, actually, of the Polish brand, you could call it. It is part of the heartbeat of Poland. And it actually represents, you can probably tell me, you can tell me more about it, but my understanding is it represents the Polish people's struggle for freedom. In fact, this song was attributed with really lifting the spirits of soldiers and helping them march forward during the Napoleonic Wars. And as you said, it helps people, in Poland in particular, feel really connected to each other. So one of my branding and design idols is this woman, Debbie Millman. She's the founder of a branding agency called Sterling Brands in New York. And she's also the creator of a podcast called Design Matters. And she recently sat down with Brené Brown, who some of you may know as like the vulnerability and shame guru. And they talked about why branding matters for you, for your organization, and for our movement. So I'd like to take a listen to part of the conversation because she can say it much better than I can.
That's what brands do now. They telegraph our affiliations, they signal our beliefs, they allow us to be seen and understood by others, and marketers look to create as much consensus as possible around the brands that they make to have the biggest possible audience all believe the same thing.
Yeah, there's such a unexpected intersection between your work and my work. And at the core, it's about people.
Yes.
Yeah.
But the really exciting thing, can I just say one really exciting thing about branding that really gives me so much hope for most of our existence on this planet, let's say as modern humans, we have been mark making. The caves of Lascaux show that we were making marks thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago. 10,000 years ago, we started to create symbols to signify our beliefs in a higher power. We did this all over the planet, which is really interesting, sort of all at the same time. Suddenly we started mark making symbols to signify a relationship that we had with a god, despite that god being different. And we used family crests, we used flags, all of these human designs to signify where we belonged, who we belonged to and with.
Yes, belonging.
It's only in the last 200 or so years that the corporation appropriated this behavior to create this sort of ultimate set of signifiers, which is a label. This label became the way in which we started to communicate various attributes of the product. And that, again, created consensus. And that's sort of the way it's been for about 250 or so years. But in the last 10 years, we, the people, have started to pull that back and have started to use the very tenets of branding to create the Nike swoosh and the Apple logo and so forth to create movements. So the very tenets that we've used first to create religious symbols and then to create flags and crests and then products, we're now using those same behaviors to signify beliefs in the way we should be living. And that's what's so exciting about things like Black Lives Matter and Me Too. You know, Tarana Burke has been doing this for a long time.
Yeah.
And whether or not she realized it, she is a brand master. It's a brand, it's much more than a brand, it's a movement, but it's been able to create a groundswell, which then results in a change in behavior, which then results in a change in the way we live in the world. And that's the most exciting thing. I think really on its very best day, branding can and should be a profound manifestation of the human spirit, because people like Alicia Garza, people like Tarana Burke are showing what's possible when you create consensus in this really important, significant way.
So as Debbie just said, branding is a profound manifestation of the human spirit. And just for some context, Tarana Burke is one of the founders of the Me Too movement, and Alicia Garza is one of the founders of the Black Lives Matter movement, just for context since their names were mentioned. So at this point, you may be thinking, okay, well, great. I get that branding is powerful and it can build movements, but there's still this giant elephant in the room, which is, isn't branding like evil? I mean, it's how McDonald's and Burger King and Lidl and Aldi and Tesco and all these companies that a lot of us campaign against, that's how they became so powerful and how they might even be abusing animals, as we all know. So that's actually a key reason, not an emotion, but a reason why caring about our branding matters, because we need to be powerful brands too. We need to look and be as strong and mighty as all of those other big corporations are, to build a powerful movement, as Debbie said, to change beliefs and to affect systemic change where you live and also all around the world. So now that you might have a sense of why branding matters, how do you know if it's actually time to make your brand better? So we're going to walk through a series of questions. I'm going to kind of pop them out and run through some examples, and then we'll have a couple minutes after that to pause and reflect. So no need to jot anything down right now unless you'd like to. We'll have time for that in a few minutes. So the first question that you can ask yourself to know if it's time to rebrand or make your brand better is it extremely clear to you and to others why you exist? In other words, do you have a clear mission statement? If you do, is it clear to you? Is it clear to your team members? Is it clear to your supporters? At the Humane League, our original mission statement was something along the lines of, we exist to reduce animal suffering by creating change at all levels. As you can see here on our old website, the main communications was around our tagline, which was empowering change and driving progress. So it's clear that we focused on something around reducing animal suffering. But when I came to THL 4.5 years ago, it wasn't clear to me what that actually meant. Like, what did it mean to create change at all levels? What levels? Is THL like Super Mario in the metaverse, climbing ladders to drive progress? It sounds pretty cool, but our job as organizations is not just to sound cool. It's also to make our brands and what we do and why we do it really accessible and understandable for everyone. So ultimately, through our rebrand, we move to this, our new mission statement, which is that we exist to end the abuse of animals raised for food. And we'll talk about how we got there in a little bit. The next question you can ask yourself is, are you clear on who you are? Not just as a founder or a leader of the organization, but as the whole entire organization. So like many of your organizations, the Humane League started as a very grassroots activist organization. So it organically happened that our voice was the smart and driven voice of our pioneering president of nearly 12 years, David Komen-Heide. But as we grew, we knew we needed to scale what Dave had built into something that could endure time and change. We needed a clear personality that we could flex across multiple spokespeople and different types of communications. So we got clear on who we are as an extension of our mission statement, which is that the Humane League is an international, we actually now say global, nonprofit ending the abuse of animals raised for foods. And then we also defined our clear and authentic and aspirational as well personality traits. So these are to be bold, to be dynamic, empowering, welcoming, and savvy. Another question you can ask yourself is, do your logo and your other visuals align with the stories that you tell about your organization, your work, and your impact? So you can see a snapshot of our old and our new Instagram handles or accounts. The one on the left features our cute green clip art pig. We love them. We never had a name for them, but we love them. And people were sometimes confused though, like, oh, does the Humane League just really do work specifically for pigs? Other people were just sometimes confused. The old Instagram handle or account on the left that you can see also contained a lot of entertaining and viral memes. They got likes and views, but they didn't really communicate anything about the work that we were actually doing. And they didn't really get people to take action either. They were just cute and fun and viral. When we moved to our new branding, we became extra intentional about the types of content that we shared, a mix of arresting campaign content focused on the abuses that animals endure every day in factory farms. We focused on plant-based recipes, endearing animal videos, fascinating facts, and a lot more, all to tap into a range of human emotions, from curiosity to outrage to joy. We're still very much evolving what our social media presence looks like, but that was a very intentional move when we rebranded. And lastly, I think that the biggest question of all that I encourage you to ask yourself is, do you and other people feel something? Like really feel something when you step back and look at your brand, whether it's on your website, your brochure, or even your business cards. When we were preparing for our brand relaunch, we met with influencers and volunteers in Los Angeles, and we asked them why their heart was for the animals, because that was our new tagline as well. And one of these change makers is a gentleman named Garrett Greer, who is building a vegan restaurant chain in California. He's advocating for animals every day, all while being bound to a wheelchair.
Hi, my name is Garrett Greer, and my heart is for the animals because I believe that all beings, humans, animals, everything, is part of this grand universe. We are all made of the same material, some form of carbon, and nobody did anything before their birth to deserve a shell any different than anybody else. So there is nobody, there is no person, animal, or otherwise, that has more of a right to life than another. And that's it.
You need a nice pause after that. Okay, so now we're going to take a moment to pause and reflect on the questions that we just talked through. So if you'd like to, you can do it mentally. If you'd like to take out a pen and paper and just take some quick notes, whatever works for you. But the first question that you can consider to know if it's time to make your brand better is it extremely clear to you and others why you exist? So I'll give you a moment to just pause and reflect on that. And you can think about, do you have a clear mission statement? Is it clear to others? The next question you can ask is, are you clear on who you are? Not just as the founder or the leader of the organization, but as the whole organization. Do your logo and other visuals align with the stories that you tell about your organization, your work, and your impact? And the last question you can consider is, do you and others feel something? Really feel something that lights you up inside when you take a step back and look at your brand? So if you answered no to any of these questions, I won't ask you to raise your hand, but if you answered no to any of these questions, you may want to consider rebranding, or at the very least, making sure that you have really clear brand guidelines within your organization that all of your team members are aware of, onboarded into, and really understand, both to communicate verbally on behalf of the organization, but also through all of the communications that you put out to your different stakeholders. Oops. Okay, so let's say that you decided that maybe you're ready for a rebrand, or you're still thinking about it, but let's just say you're ready. So now what? I get that that can feel pretty daunting, and there are also several key building blocks that I found to be really valuable in embarking on a rebrand. Now, to be clear, these are just suggestions. They're not hard and fast rules, because needless to say, you know your organization best, you know your cultural context best, you know what your team will respond to and your supporters will respond to. So I'll just be talking through the lens of the journey that THL, the Humane League, went on in embarking on our rebrand. So for us, we found it really valuable to start by asking questions and listening to feedback, since especially we as team members have a lot of implicit biases. Like we may be one of our audiences, but we are certainly not all of our audiences. So at the very start of the rebrand, the first thing we did was survey volunteers, donors, and some of our team members as well. And we asked questions like, if you're talking to a friend or colleague about the Humane League, how would you describe the organization? And what greater role do you see the Humane League serving in society and in the world at large? We then took all of the survey results, there were about 80 in total, and we mapped them all out on sticky notes like these to identify different themes that we saw. So we heard things like the Humane League's role in the world is to influence major companies to change animal practices, or our role is to collaborate and build coalitions. So this is not us telling ourselves what we think. This is other people engaged with our organization telling us. That's really valuable. And we then conducted an internal audit of all of our existing brand and style guides. We looked at all of our communication platforms. We looked at what's not working well, what is working well, where there are inconsistencies, where there's confusion. And then we got together and we actually workshopped the brand with a very small group of stakeholders. In our case, it was our president, Dave, it was myself, and it was our head of design and creative. You know, I've also done rebrands where it's just been myself doing the rebrand on my own, which was not ideal in the end. I've done them with 2 people, myself and the founder, and also with over 10 people. And I personally think that about 3 to 5 people when you're workshopping your brand is really valuable to get a lot of discussion and create a flow, but not be pulled in too many different directions. Since again, in this workshop, you really want to look at the feedback that you've heard from others. It's not as much about what you think, it's about what are you hearing from the outside looking in. This is also a really good time to talk through your brand audit and to also, of course, workshop your mission, your why, you could say. So one tool that I found to be really helpful across a few different rebrands is this tool called The Big Ideal. It's from the agency Ogilvy, and it's available for free. If you just Google The Big Ideal online, you'll find it. And I find this to be really helpful because you're basically looking at the problem that you're trying to solve in the world, which is your cultural tension. And then you're looking at the solution that you see for your organization to solving that problem. And that's unique to your organization. And that is your brand's best self. And then when you put the two together, you get this sentence that you can see here. So my brand or company, the Humane League in our case, believes the world would be a better place if. And that really is like your unique positioning. Your end mission statement may not be literally what you put here, but it's probably going to be extremely similar, maybe with a few language changes. So you'll then want to get, or I would recommend getting feedback from others, ideally from those totally outside of your organization and even our movement. So when we landed on our mission, we had 2 versions. One was to end the abuse of animals raised for food, and one was to end the suffering of animals raised for food. Now, of course, they sound really similar, but they mean different things to different people, certainly in different regions, different languages, different cultures. So we tested that. We used just a simple platform, mTurk, that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, and we ran testing in our different regions around the world, and we tested these 2 mission statements, and we asked people questions like, how does this mission statement make you feel? Or when you hear the word abuse or animal suffering, what comes to your mind? And then later, just to forecast ahead, when we moved into the design phase, we also tested our logos with mainstream audiences as well. So once you've gotten all that feedback and you get clear on your mission, it can be then really useful to go into drafting all of the key communications around your brand. So that can just be as simple as your who, your what, your why, your where, your how. And this process can really help you crystallize your brand personality and also just puts it to the test. How does it actually feel and sound when I start crafting language around my new mission and identity? And then I think the very fun part is time to get creative. So at the Humane League, we created our logo in just a few weeks. It included several rounds of feedback, several different concepts. We created the logo with 2 different designers with 2 different minds looking at this problem and opportunity. Sydney and Kristen were our designers that worked on this. And in the end, we landed on this logo that you can see at the bottom, our main logo, and then also this icon called the mended heart, which represents the broken food system being repaired through our shared work. So of course, our heart is a universal global icon, so that supports our global needs. And it also is literally a symbol that makes you feel something on some level. And that, again, was really powerful to tap into human emotions. Okay, so you've done all of that. Now let's say that you're ready to actually launch. I get that that can also feel pretty daunting, like, oh my gosh, now we have to get this out into the world. What does that look like? So again, at THL, about 4 months after we began our rebrand project, we were ready to share it internally with our staff members. But a lot of them, they knew that we were rebranding, but they weren't involved every step of the way. Because, again, we really focused in on a few people really working on this, and taking all the information that they gave us to make informed decisions. So we made sure that we rolled it out to staff in a very thoughtful way, which for us looked like having an all-staff call. We all work remotely, so we were on one call together, and we gave background on why we had arrived at this rebrand. What was the past context that our team members were coming from? How did that relate to their present context? And then how did that relate to their future at the Humane League and the impact that they're making in the world? And we created a video, and because of bandwidth issues, we didn't share it on the screen, but we sent everyone a link and asked everyone to just hit play at the same time. And we unveiled the brand for everyone. And I have to say, I think my heart stopped beating and my breath stopped for about 3 minutes. I was looking at everyone's faces. And then we paused and talked through more about what was going to happen next so that everyone really understood how this would impact them. And I have to say the feedback was resoundingly enthusiastic. And I think that really comes down to the consciousness of this entire journey, including how we actually brought it forward to our team members. Now, you may also want to consider how you roll out these changes to special audiences. So in our case, we did a sneak peek mailing for major donors. You can see that here. And then we also sent a highly targeted, very personal one-to-one email to all of our very engaged volunteers. And then you might also want to consider how you bring other stakeholders into the conversation. So for us, as we mentioned, we had a party and a photo shoot in Los Angeles. It was very intimate. We invited volunteers and influencers because we wanted to create social media content with them to support the relaunch. Because we didn't just want to tell our story. We wanted our story to be a conversation made up of other people's voices, those people who actually shape our brand and our movement every day. We wanted it to represent our really expansive heartbeat. So in the end, our launch plans look something like this, starting with a pre-launch phase about 2 weeks before we actually launched. That was on social media specifically. Then we really leaned into the communications and started to give hints about what was to come, little visual cues. And then we actually launched. And then we also had a post-launch period where we mapped out all of our content in advance. And then we're really responsive, of course, to the conversation that was happening online. And in the end, this is what the launch actually looked like. I still get a little choked up actually when I see that. And today we've been talking a lot about emotions, because how you make others feel and how you help others belong as part of a community, as part of your cause, is actually how you change people's behavior and how they choose to live. And it starts with your brand. And that is how I believe in my heart of hearts that our small but growing and mighty movement will change the world. And that is what you all are doing. Thank you so much, and here to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you again for your speech. We have one question so far from Adam. From my experience with corporations, values and mission statements are often seen by both employees and outsiders as meaningless publicity ploy and not taken to heart. How do you avoid that, and how do you have people identify with them?
Totally, yeah. So totally get that and have seen that. For us, I mean, part of it is internally, starting with, as I mentioned, onboarding our team members when they join into who we are as an organization, what our mission statement is, how to talk about the organization. So we have an orientation, it's called How to Talk About THL, and we lead team members through that when they join. And then we also continually bring up our values in the way that we work. So for instance, we have a program called Quarterly Kudos, where people can nominate team members based on how they're living out our core values as an organization. So they're part of our daily conversation, and I think that's key. Like, it actually has, to the point, be lived in the organization. Otherwise, it is just marketing. And similarly, like, all of the work that we do, all of the programs ladder up to our mission, which again is to end the abuse of animals raised for food.
Thank you for that. Additionally, do you think there are any risks involved with rebranding? How do you avoid losing old supporters who might not identify with the change brand?
There's definitely risk, yeah. And that's why we wanted to be really thoughtful about how we rolled it out and bringing people into the conversation. So we took those stages. We first rolled out to team members, then to our major donors. And that was also a conversation. We got feedback from donors after they received their mailing. Dave, our president, and our development team had lots of conversations with donors, gave them space to ask questions. I think we had a town hall with donors and conversations. We talked to influencers, we talked to volunteers. So it really was like this tiered process of rolling out the communications, making sure all of the people closest to us as an organization heard about it first and had time to adapt to the change, because we know that change is just really difficult for all of us.
Great, thank you so much. How important is it that the employees within the organization personally agree with and act in accordance with the branding of the organization?
I mean, I think it's important in the sense of having cohesivity and, again, like alignment, that we're all one team doing work together. Of course, we're individuals. We don't expect people to, like, I don't know, be in a cult and get tattoos of the brand, but they can do that if they want. When that's not part of it. But really to like make sure that they, again, understand how to speak about the brand. I mean, when we present, like you probably have seen this week, everyone uses by and large the same core presentation template, just to make sure there's cohesivity. And I mean, it's what every probably major brand you might think of. I mean, Nike, for instance, like their logo is always their logo, and they might use different creative attached to that. But that's consistent all around the world, and I think that's really important to be one aligned organization and one team.
Similarly, in the same vein, how flexible or strict do you believe brand guidelines should be?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, we're continuing to evolve ours. So we started out with the core. I mentioned like the who, the what, the why, the where, the how. We built out brand guidelines for design that included colors and typefaces, but then we've expanded on that over time. I think maybe a year and a half or so after we launched, we created an illustration style that was not part of our original rebrand. And we had space for that. We knew the core foundation, we knew our colors, we knew our personality, so then it's easy when you know those things to build on that. So I think it's important to leave space for flexibility. We're all going to change and evolve over time. The world changes, so we have to be responsive to that. You know, I mentioned we're still evolving our social media presence, for instance. And that's because, in large part, like, social media is obviously changing day by day, year by year, and we can't just be static and put out the same type of content that looks exactly the same every single day. But we need to do that in a way that still keeps the core brand intact, and that's what we're navigating right now.
Great, thank you so much. Celine asks, how long did it take to complete this rebranding in terms of strategy, content creation, and brand guidelines, and to launch it? And how many people worked on it?
Yeah, so the initial part, the internal piece to get us to share internally to staff was 4 months. And then it took another 6 months, so 10 months in total, before we launched publicly. And as I said, in between, we like pre-launched to different audiences along the way. And the second part of the question was, sorry?
How many people worked on it?
Gosh, yeah, so there was a core group of about 4 of us who really actively worked on it, myself, our president, Dave, and our designers, Kristen and Sydney. But then we had other team members along the way who chimed in. Like, we got feedback from our senior leadership team to make sure that they were bought in. We heard their feedback. We got feedback from staff. So there were feedback phases throughout it, but the core group was about 4 people.
Thank you. Adam asks, from my experience with corporations, values and mission statements are often seen by both employees and outsiders as a meaningless publicity ploy and not taken to heart. How do you avoid that and have people identify with them?
Yeah, we kind of covered that, but I can speak a little bit more.
Apologies.
No, that's okay. I mean, I can also say that, I'll just add that I think that's why I said we wanted to like make it we wanted to make it a conversation. So that's one of the reasons we created those videos, for instance, with influencers and volunteers, to hear their voices. So it's not just us as an organization telling you what we want you to think and feel. It really is this co-creation process that I think is really important. And frankly, I would like us to do more of that as an organization. So I think that's even more a part of our future.
Right, in that case, a new question for the last one. Sorry, just give me a second. Someone was asking about advice on how to undergo a rebranding in a small organization when you might not have the capacity or the people or the finances, and if you have any advice in that regard.
I'm curious how many people are in the organization, if someone's up for sharing, whoever asked the question. So yeah, if it's a very small, if it's a very small organization, I mean, I think you probably, as I said, want to ideally have 3 people working on your rebrand. It's possible to involve people outside of the organization. I mean, a lot of people work with agencies, of course, or consultants, but you could even like bring in a volunteer or someone who's intimately connected to the brand, but also like has a little bit of distance, which I actually think is very healthy and helpful. So that could be one approach. Certainly you could maybe get an agency or consultant pro bono to help you who's specializes in branding. I think there's a lot of value in doing it in-house just because you then have like direct access to tapping into, as I said, the heart of your brand. Like it's in you, it's in your staff, it's in your volunteers, but you could work with an outside agency, of course.
Great, I think that's all the questions we have now. Thank you very much for attending, and I mean, if people are still happy to stay, then we can continue to go through all of them.
I guess like is it 10 minutes, 15 minutes?
Okay,
Yeah,
if
I'm happy
people are happy to. I'm happy to keep going, and if you're happy to keep answering, then in that case. Do you have any guidelines for pictures, and how do you get suitable pictures?
Suitable pictures?
I'm assuming in terms of in line with your rebranding.
Yeah. Well, I think you need to create your own aesthetic that then can be layered on top of maybe others' photography, for instance. So all of our photography mostly comes from like We Animals Media, other organizations who do investigations, for instance. We do some stock photography, although we try to limit that, of course. But it's really key that you have your own brand aesthetic established, which is part of this rebrand process, where you're really going to define what you want to look like based on your mission. And your mission, in my opinion, is what will inform your colors, your typography. Like the angles that we chose, for instance, that you can see here is tapping into so we started with the logo as our first design creation, and you can see the mended heart. Is it here at the bottom? Let's see. You can see the mended heart there in the middle has these jagged edges to it. It's the mended heart. Again, it represents the food system being repaired through our shared work. So those edges then became part of our design aesthetics. You can see here in these signs, we like cut off the corners. Then we created these angular lines to be like very bold, as we talked about as part of our personality, and to be just very like sharp and clear and decisive, because that represents who we are as an organization. For each of you, that will look very different probably.
Petr asks, what about changing the name of the organization? Is it feasible without losing brand awareness?
It is feasible. It's going to take a lot more work, that's for sure. But I think it goes back to then really being probably extra intentional about taking people on a journey and like step by step telling people why you made this decision, really dripping out that change over time so that people have a chance to adapt. And you could, I mean, probably what would especially help is really involving all of your key stakeholders in a feedback phase, so that they also feel shared ownership over the totally new branding, it sounds like.
Emre asks, what do you want to get out of a rebranding, and what do you think makes a rebranding successful? How do you measure that?
I think what you want to get out of it is different for everyone. At the heart, it's about being really clear on your purpose, because that guides your strategy, it guides your tactics, it technically guides everything that you do. Like, your mission is your core. And until you do that, I mean, you can certainly have strategies without having a core mission, but it's hard to really pin it to something and be really clear, like, yes, this is what we're doing and this is why we're doing it. I'm sorry, what was the second part of the question?
How is it successful, and how do you measure the success of the rebranding?
Yeah, so a lot of it for us, and I think probably for you, is going to be qualitative feedback. So we got a lot of feedback from donors. I remember Peter Singer, it was like this shining moment, messaged Dave, our president at the time, and was like, I love the new look. And I was like, Peter Singer was looking at our new look? So different people weighed in. We got lots of qualitative feedback. But then also in the video you saw, we pulled out some stats. So we also measured, I mean, just engagement on our content. We measured how many donations we got. We measured increased adoption on our action app, for instance. And then, ideally, over time, we would have done like a pre-brand relaunch assessment and a post. We didn't actually do that and measure that officially at the Humane League. So that's something that you can think about, to really think about, over time, is your brand engagement and your brand equity, so to speak, really increasing?
Thank you for that. To what extent do you believe specific campaigns should be branded? Should they be linked to the parent organization, or should they have a unique identity of their own?
I think it depends on what kind of campaign. So if you're doing a really aggressive campaign against a company, you may not want to link it as much to your brand, especially if you're in coalition with others. You might need to have a separate brand, as we've done before. But I think there are things that you can do to bring in your brand elements, as we talked about, without being so explicit. Like, your logo doesn't have to be on everything, right? Not everything needs to look super branded. But you can tap into some of your brand elements to create that cohesivity, like the angles, like your typography, your fonts, and then play with that. That gives you a lot more flexibility as a brand to not be so stagnant and to play across your different campaigns.
Relatedly, Julia asks, did you also rebrand all of your campaigns through the rebranding process?
We did, for the most part. I mean, as I mentioned, we were doing some campaigns in coalition. Like, I think around that time, our McDonald's campaign was running in coalition with other orgs. So like, that was its own brand identity, because also, not even because of our rebrand, it was just because it was with other organizations. So it wasn't about the Humane League, it was about our shared work with others.
And for a more broader question, what are your thoughts about positivity for the future you work for versus a more darker present that we might have now?
Sorry, can you repeat it? What are your thoughts about positivity for the future rather than
a more darker present than we might have now.
In terms of how that applies to your branding, I'm guessing, yeah. I mean, the usual recommendation in branding is to be positive and to have a mission statement even that's really positive, that gives people a higher aspiration to aim for. We took a slightly different direction at the Humane League. Like you can see in our mission, it says that we end the abuse. So it's not something we're creating, which is usually the recommendation. It's about ending something. And we did that because we did that work of identifying who we are as an organization, what our personality is. And we're a pretty adversarial, you could say aggressive organization in the way that we campaign. So that felt authentic to us and our work. But yeah, for most organizations, you'll want to lean into the inspirational and aspirational positivity.
Related to an earlier question about small organizations, Carmel asked, if you have a small organization that can't do a big branding launch, what would you say are the most important things from a marketing aspect that you should definitely do?
You should definitely revisit your mission statement and just sense check. I mean, that could be like, you know, I don't know, a 30-minute conversation with some of your team members on like, does this still align with who we are? If you don't have a mission statement, that would be a place to start and even just kind of like take your existing language and put it together. You could use that tool we talked about called the Big Ideal without doing a huge full rebrand, but it really does, from my experience, start with your mission. So I would start there and then think about what else needs to change after that.
All right, so for our last few questions, David asks, how was the branding for the Open Wing Alliance influenced by THLs, if at all, and what were the considerations in keeping them separated or connected?
Yeah, so the Open Wing Alliance brand was launched before our rebrand. So we didn't change the Open Wing Alliance branding, really. I mean, there was some slight changes I can talk about. But because, again, it represents a coalition of groups with one shared identity, 90 organizations right now around the world that I'm sure many of you are a part of, we kept that branding separate very intentionally. Similarly, in October, we're launching a new public policy program in the US, which specifically focuses on creating legislative change in coalition with other organizations like the OWA in the US. And so that also has a separate branding completely like the OWA. But I can't share it yet because it hasn't launched, but when it's launched, you might see it, and you can see that there's like similarities between that brand and the Humane League, which we were very intentional about, like shared typefaces, shared angles. So there's identity crossover, but very subtly. We did make some slight changes to the OWA branding, not really because of THL, but because we realized it was like a very limited brand. We needed to add more colors, so I think we added red a couple of years ago, which just happens to correspond with the Humane League's colors as well.
Thank you. Lastly, all I would like to ask, where can we find the last video that you were showing about the rebranding for the Humane League?
Yeah, it's a good question. If you were to Google the Humane League Shorty Awards, SHORTY Awards, it will come up. We entered our rebrand in their awards, and we were finalists in that. So you can find it there, but I think they're going to share the presentation, so I have a link to it in the presentation as well.
Great, thank you so much for the Q&A, and please thank